Hi, folks. Hope you are okay. Love to everybody out there. It's good to be with you. I'm just doing a few videos just to uh, give us some education about how to go forward and what we're up against. And I hope everybody's okay. We will be doing Speaker's Corner review later tonight about 8 o'clock, but I'm going to just do a few videos here. I'm going to give a little lecture. It's not my material, it's Dr. Hammond, and you can find it in his book, um, Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam, by Peter Hammond. I put a link under the video, and so you can get the book, and we're looking at chapter 7. So it's not my material. Hi, Gareth. God bless you. It's not my material, but it's good material, and so I'm going to give a lecture using his material, and I'll just bounce off some of the things that he said. So I was reading it today, and I thought it was important to bring it to people's attention. To understand Islam, its Sharia law, Islamic slave trade, and tourism, it is essential that we understand the history of the founder of Islam and his successor, the Caliphates. Muhammad, the praised one, the founder of Islam, was born in the city of Mecca in AD 570. According to Muslim legend, he was born clean, circumcised, with his umbilical cord cut, immediately proclaimed, Allah Akbar, God is great. His father, Abdullah, died before Muhammad's birth, and his mother, Amina, a sickly woman described as involved in the occult and prone to hallucinations, died when Muhammad was only 6 years old. Muhammad was then cared for by his grandfather, Abdul-Muttalib, who died 3 years later. The 9-year-old was then entrusted into the care of his uncle, Talib, who used him as a camel driver in his caravans, and biographers have noted that Muhammad grew up as a deeply resentful young man, frustrated by his powerlessness and relegated to the fringe of society. When Muhammad was 25, the Ethiopians threatened Mecca. Muhammad ran away from the battlefield and became a social outcast, exposed to contempt and ostracism. Muhammad then became a shepherd, the lowest social position in Arabia. Later, he became an assistant to a traveling cloth merchant, and his work took him to Haicha, where he met Khadija, a wealthy widow. 15 years older than he, Muhammad entered her service as camel driver and eventually rose to become her supervisor. When Khadija chose to marry Muhammad, his transition from rags to riches was assured. For the next 10 years, Muhammad developed Khadija's business, displaying skills and talents previously unrealized. It was during this time that Muhammad began to spend time meditating in solitude, sometimes for weeks on end, in the caves of Mount Hira. It was then in the year AD 610, when Muhammad was 40 years old. Excuse me. Excuse me. That he reported to Khadija a disturbing experience. He feared that he was being possessed by demons. It was then that Khadija exclaimed, "Rejoice, O son of my uncle, and be of good heart. By him whose hand is Khadija's soul." Excuse me. That thou wilt be the prophet of his people. Khadija assured him that such a virtuous man as he could not be a victim of demonic delusion, but should accept his experience as a visitation by an angel, and that he should accept the call with humility and gladness. Khadija became the first believer of Islam. From that time on, Muhammad received revelations which he claimed came directly from God. Sometimes there were physical symptoms that accompanied these revelations. Muhammad would hear the sound of bells, and he would perspire profusely, even on a cold day. Froth and foam at the mouth, wreath in agony, jerk around his eyes, would roll backwards, and he would lose consciousness and enter a trance-like state. In AD 613, Muhammad began to publicly preach his revelations. Initially, his message was simple, and Muhammad described his mission as limited to one task, only to warn. Surah 11:12. Muhammad preached the need to submit to Allah, warned of the end of the world and the day of judgment, when all would be either condemned to the torments of hell or allowed entry into paradise. Muhammad's ministry was received with indifference and derision by most Meccans. However, amongst his first converts were Muhammad's slave and adopted son Zayd and his cousin Ali, the son of Talib, and his close friend and lifelong companion Abu Bakr. The leaders of Mecca sneered at the audacity of this common man with no natural claim to authority or prestige who dared to command the obedience of his superiors. They saw Muhammad's preaching against their idols as a subversive ploy designed to undermine the established social order. Despite Muhammad's attempt at appeasement, offering a theological compromise and accommodating the three most popular Meccan deities, Alat, Ulaza, and Manat, as capable of interceding with Allah on behalf of the faithful, the so-called satanic verses, the Meccans ridiculed Muhammad. Who did this pretentious shepherd think he was? This coward who had fled from the battlefield, this destitute boy who owed his fortune to marrying a widow old enough to be his mother. Sarcasm and spite were hurled at him by an increasingly hostile population. The Miraj. The painful mockery and harassment failed to discourage Muhammad. His claim grew even more extravagant. In AD 619, Muhammad claimed that the angel Gabriel took him from Mecca to Jerusalem, where he prayed at the temple, the furthest mosque, and journeyed through the seven heavens, encountering previous prophets such as Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and was ushered into the very presence of God himself. All these events supposedly transpired in the course of one night, while his companions testified that his body remained in Mecca. Unfortunately for Muhammad, the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed in AD 70. However, he was apparently unaware of that fact. As he hoped to be accepted by Christians and Jews as a prophet, Muhammad's early revelations include positive statements about the people of the book, and Muslims were commanded to observe the Jewish Sabbath and pray in the direction of Jerusalem. Later, when it was plain that the Jews and Christians rejected his prophethood, Muhammad dropped the Jewish Sabbath and changed the direction from Jerusalem to Mecca. The same year as Muhammad's supposed journey into heaven, the Miraj, AD 619, his uncle Abu-Talib, who had protected him, died. Then Muhammad's wife Qadjat died a few months later. The leadership of his clan passed to another uncle, Abu Lahab, who withdrew the clan's protection from Muhammad. Muhammad became a despised and unwanted outcast, vulnerable and in an increasingly desperate and precarious situation. Hiya Teddy, hiya Lambert, God bless you all, and Gareth. God bless Teddy. The main thing about this is I want you to just keep with me till halfway through because it gets really interesting. Really. This is why I wanted to do this, because it opens your eyes to a lot of stuff as we go on. So just bear with me. The Hijrah. However, Muhammad's fortunes were about to change. A group of men from the oasis of Yathrib, later be called Medina, some 200 miles north, traveled to Mecca for the annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba, identified themselves as Muslims and promised to propagate Muhammad's message to Yathrib. In June AD 622, a group of 75 men from Yathrib came and professed Islam, pledged to defend Muhammad as one of their own. At this point, a council of elders in Mecca were being assembled to try Muhammad as a traitor. This was when Muhammad chose to flee Mecca, the Hijrah. Muhammad's arriving in Yathrib on 24th of September AD 622 marked the beginning of the calendar of Islam. After the Hijrah, from that point on, Yathrib became the city of the Prophet Medinet el-Nebi, which had been shortened to Medina. It was at this point, when Muhammad would finally have armed men at his disposal, that he received his first revelation permitting jihad. In Medina, he was given a plot of land and a house, but he was continually short of money. Then Muhammad authorized attacks on the Mecca merchant caravans. So notice this is not self-defense, this is going on the attack. Then Muhammad authorized attacks on the Mecca merchant caravans, and Muhammad's first 3 attacks in AD 623 were all failures. However, in early AD 624, the Muslims executed their first successful ambush of a merchant caravan. Their attack achieved complete surprise because it took place in the holy month of Ramadan, a time of truce respected by even the most vicious bandits until that time. Muhammad just received a revelation allowing warfare during the holy month of Ramadan. Aside from the loot captured, Muhammad held 2 prisoners captive until their relatives paid a ransom of 80 ounces of silver. On the 15th of March, AD 624, the Battle of Badr occurred, when Muhammad's 300 men defeated a protected force more than 3 times their number, when 40 Meccans were killed and 60 taken prisoner for the loss of only 14 Muslims. This was interpreted as a glorious victory for Muhammad and a miracle of Allah. The prisoners were brought before Muhammad and beheaded in cold blood. One of the prisoners pleaded for his life, asking that he would be allowed to take care of his little girl. Muhammad's response was hellfire. Muhammad then rejoiced as the man was beheaded. Muhammad established a principle that 1/5 of all the loot was always to be given to Muhammad. Know that out of the booty that you may acquire in war, a 5th share is assigned to God and to the Apostle. Surah 8:41. How convenient that was, eh? Assassinations. As Muhammad strengthened his power base in Medina, he ordered or suggested the assassination of various critics. This included Azam bint Marwan, a poetess who produced poem ridiculing Muhammad and those who followed him. Will no one rid me of this daughter of Marwan? Exclaimed Muhammad. One Muslim, Umar, that very night responded by stabbing her as she nursed her youngest child. So he basically got a young woman who was a poet, who was criticizing him, assassinated. Abu Afghan, a man over 100 years old who protested against the murder by Muslims and produced poems mocking Muhammad, was also murdered at the word of Muhammad. It's another poet taken out by Muhammad and his henchmen. A Jewish poet, Kaban al-Asharif, whose poem grieved for the victims of the Muslim assassins, was treacherously slain by a Muslim who pretended to befriend the victim until he could entice him away from his home and family to murder him. So not only did Muhammad get people assassinated, he did it in the most gruesome and the most conniving way. Very, very wicked. Next, a Jewish merchant, Ibn Sunayya, was murdered by one of Muhammad's disciples. Then a prominent early Jewish merchant, Abu Rafi, was hacked to death by 6 Muslims while slept in his bed at night. After this cold-blooded murder, the 6 men argued over which of them had actually killed the man. At this, Muhammad smiled and started to check their swords. He pointed out that the one whose sword still had traces of food on the blade was the winner, for Abu Rafi would have just finished dinner before falling asleep. The hadith records the names of at least 27 individuals who were murdered on Muhammad's orders. Let that sink in, folks. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. Has that sunk in, folks? Yeah, he wasn't poor, Lambert. He was creaming off the money. He got booty from the camel raids, and in war he got booty. He had the first pick of the women, the first pick of everything. Mass murder and mass rapes. Muhammad arranged for practically all the Jews living in Arabia to either be killed or exiled from their homes and country. After murdering individual Jews, Muhammad expelled 2 tribes from Medina. The Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir was ordered to leave Medina within 10 days. When they refused, Muhammad's men besieged them and starved them into submission. After several weeks, they surrendered and were expelled. All their belongings and land were confiscated and distributed amongst Muhammad's supporters. The Jews of Banu Nadir were slaughtered by the Muslims 2 years later in their new homes. In AD 626, when Muhammad followers attacked the tribe of Banu al-Muttalib. Have you noticed something, folks? It's getting worse and worse and worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Just notice this, folks. Notice this. In AD 626, when Muhammad's followers attacked the tribe of Banu al-Muttalib, the Muslims slaughtered many tribesmen and looted thousands of their camels and sheep. They also kidnapped some of their excellent women. Then Muhammad's followers subjected the captive woman to gang rape. The hadith records how some of the Muslims went to Muhammad with a problem. Abu Sa'id al-Qadari remembered that they questioned Muhammad on whether it was acceptable to practice sexual intercourse with captive women by observing azl or coitus interruptus. We desired them, for we were suffering from the absence of our wives, but at the time we also desired ransom for them. So we asked Allah's Messenger, may be peace upon them, and he said, it does not matter if you do not do it, for every soul that is to be born up to the day of the resurrection will be born. Muhammad's revelation had already sanctioned the rape of captive women, those captive whom your right hand possesses, Surah 424. On this occasion, the only concern seemed to be whether the victim's ransom value would be diminished or lost if they were returned pregnant to their husbands. Muhammad effectively told his companions to go ahead and rape the captive woman without worrying about whether or not they would get pregnant. Wow. You can't believe it, can you? It's absolutely wicked. In AD 627, the Meccans mobilized a huge army, 10,000 men, to end the threat of this traitor who was disturbing their commerce. The Battle of the Ditch was a victory for Muhammad. The trenches his men had dug at strategic places around Medina, preventing the enemy cavalry from being effectively deployed. As the Meccans withdrew, Muhammad proceeded to attack the last Jewish tribe in Medina, the Banu Qurayza. Muhammad ordered the men to convert to Islam or face death, and when they refused, up to 900 were decapitated at the ditch in front of their wives and children. The widows were subsequently raped and sold into slavery. Muhammad chose one, Rahana bin Amma, as his concubine. Despite this poor woman having witnessed both her father and husband slaughtered before her eyes only hours before, Muhammad forced himself on her that night. Wow. Muhammad taught captive virgin girls in war were made lawful for the soldiers for copulation. That's in Mishkat 2, page 440. Mishkat 2, page 440. Hi, Nine. God bless you, bro. Hope you're okay. The polygamous prophet. Muhammad had lived 25 years in marriage with his first wife, Khadijah. But after her death and the hijrah to Medina, Muhammad married at least another 15 wives. Many of these were widows or divorces. One of Muhammad's wives, Aisha, was 6 years old when she was given in marriage to him, and 9 years old when he consummated the marriage, according to the hadith. In AD 628, Mary the Copt, a Christian slave, was given to Muhammad by the governor of Egypt, El-Mokas. The hadith records that the wives of Muhammad were jealous when Muhammad had no dealings with any of them for a full month, living with Mary alone. Although Muhammad received a revelation rebuking the jealousy of his wives, he also put into the Quran a verse prohibiting his wives from remarrying after his death. When Muhammad married his daughters-in-law, Zainab, many of the community were scandalized. Zainab was the only wife of Zayd, Muhammad's adopted son. One day when Muhammad came to Zayd's house, he noticed the youthful beauty of his daughter-in-law, scantily clad body. The hadith records how Muhammad exclaimed, "Praise be Allah who changed men's hearts." When Zainab reported the incident to Zayd, he rushed over to Muhammad to offer to divorce his wife and give her to him. After initially refusing this offer, Muhammad received revelation where Allah supposedly instructed him to marry his daughter-in-law, Zainab. Wow. I knew that, but I mean, when you hear it again and again, it's crazy. In the 9th year after the Hijrah, January AD 630, the city of Mecca surrendered to Muhammad. At the head of an army of 10,000, Muhammad entered the city in triumph. In AD 632, Muhammad died of a violent fever at age 63, the 11th year of the Hijrah. Yet, just keep praying. Just keep praying. Dorcas is all right, and God guides us and just blesses what we do, you know. But thanks, Nine. Appreciate it, bro. So we continue. We now get to the caliphs. This is why I wanted to bring your attention. I want you to listen now to the fruit of Muhammad's ministry, because what you're about to read now is absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So all this is on page 89 and onwards now of the Caliphs of this book, Slavery, Terrorism and Islam, by Dr. Peter Hammond, who I've come to really respect. So the Caliphs. The Caliphate was instituted as an attempt to regulate politics on the basis of the legacy of Muhammad. The Caliphate was Allah's viceroy on earth, combining both religious and political power and the tradition of Muhammad. The four caliphs who followed in apostolic tradition of Muhammad were Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. These rightly guided ones successfully ruled as caliphs from Muhammad's death in AD 632 to AD 661. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, was the father of Aisha. The wars of apostasy that raged during Abu Bakr's brief caliphate were necessitated because the conversions to Islam by many tribes was apparently acts of expediency or survival, rather than sincere, wholehearted choice. Abu Bakr died in AD 634. So he's continuing the battle with these tribes, converting them to Islam, but they're not converting because they want to. They're converting because they've got no choice. Okay. The Caliph Umar expanded the boundaries of Islam by raiding the frontiers of Byzantium and Persia. By the time of Umar's death, Syria, Egypt, parts of Persia had fallen to the Arabs. The Byzantines suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk in AD 636. Jerusalem was captured in AD 638. The Persians were defeated in Nivand in 641, and the conquest of northern Egypt was completed in AD 641. Under Umar, made extensive use of former imperial mercenaries and military slaves who advised the Arabs in the science of battlefield tactics and military technology. In AD 644, Umar's brilliant career was cut short when an Iraqi assassinated him while he was at prayer in a mosque. So we see here in the Caliph of Umar quite clearly a massive expansion. And many of these battles and wars, let's say some of them are defensive, but obviously they're not all defensive. There's an expansion going on here. There's a massive expansion. The third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, consolidated and expanded Umar's conquest. By trying to unify the Muslim empire, Uthman met with much resistance. Many were also aggravated by his forcible standardization of the Quran. All versions and copies of the Quran had to be surrendered under pain of death for destruction. At the end of Uthman issued a new revised standard version of the Quran, which endures to this day. In AD 656, Caliph Uthman was assassinated in a gruesome way, was not allowed to be buried in a Muslim cemetery. As his wife and friends tried to bury him by night, they were cursed and stoned by Arabs. Uthman was buried in a Jewish cemetery. So you can see, like in the Islamic early days, there's even assassinations of these caliphs, you know. So it's not a kind of like you look at the apostles, how they lived, Paul, Peter, and you compare to the caliphs, the four caliphs. Four caliphs were kind of like military despots, you know. Demi, God bless you, bro. Okay, will do. Thank you. Caliph Ali was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. From his new capital, Damascus, he attempted to consolidate the Islamic Empire amidst widespread accusations that he had been behind the murder of Caliph Uthman. With the support of Aisha, Talha, and al-Zubair, rebelled against Ali. In the Battle of the Camel, 10,000 Muslims were killed. Although Ali won this battle, he then faced an uprising from Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, who also accused him of complicity in the assassination of Uthman. The resulting battle cost many lives, but without any decisive victory. Muawiyah and Ali agreed to appoint an arbitrator, thus undermined the authority of Ali, who was assassinated by one of his former supporters. Another assassination. It kind of runs in the family of Islamic family, doesn't it? Ali's eldest son, Muhammad's grandson, Hassan, was seen as the rightful heir. But when Muhammad opposed his succession, Hassan, plagued by many defections, abandoned the caliphate and fled to live quietly in Medina for the rest of his life. Muawiyah then ruled not only Syria and Egypt, but the whole Islamic Empire. Ali's other son, al-Hussein, together with most of his family, were murdered on the orders of Caliph Yazid in October AD 680. This battle of Karbala was actually more of an assassination than a battle. Hussein's head was sent to Yazid in Damascus. This sealed the split in Islam between the Sunni and Shia. The Shia still regard Ali and his sons Hassan and Hussein as the only legitimate line of succession. Hussein is commemorated as a martyr. Despite the jealousies, intrigues, deceit, and dissensions, hatred, and mass murders, most Muslims look upon the early period of the four rightly guided caliphs as the most ideal model of the Ummah, one that was never attained in subsequent centuries but should be striven for. Wow, if that's the case, God help us. If they were the ideal to live by, then God help us, because they were absolute nightmare. Absolute nightmare. And then they all end with assassinations. They all end with assassinations, you know. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this little lecture using Dr. Hammond's material. The reason why I'm doing it is I'm trying to help people in the West, even if it's just a handful of people. I'm trying to help people in the West to prepare yourself for what is coming in the UK and Europe. That's why I'm doing this. If this lecture is, if you listen to this lecture and you understand what this lecture is doing, you'll understand that this lecture is providing you with concrete historical evidence of where Islam will lead as it embeds itself in the UK, as it's embedding itself in America and in the West. This is where it's leading, folks. And you better wake up. You better wake up, and you better wake up fast. Okay, you better wake up fast. So let's continue. So it's not been a good history, as we've seen. Muslim massacres. The first wave of Islamic conquest involved many massacres. During the Muslim invasion of Syria in AD 634, thousands of Christians were massacred. Muslim slave traders slit the throats of stragglers. As Mesopotamia was conquered between AD 635 and 642, many churches and monasteries were ransacked and ministers and Christians slain. And the conquest of Egypt, AD 640, 641, the towns of Bensa, Fayum, Niku, and Aboit were all put to the sword. The inhabitants of Cilicia were all enslaved. In Armenia, the entire population of the Uchitia was wiped out. When the Muslims invaded Cyprus, they looted and pillaged the homes and churches and massacred much of the population. In North Africa, when Tripoli was captured in AD 643 by Amina, he forced all the Jews and Christians to hand over all their women and children as slaves. When Carthage was captured, it was burned to the ground and most of its inhabitants slaughtered. This was just by 643 AD, folks. Muhammad died. When did Muhammad die? Right about 630. Within a few years, Islam spread to Egypt, to Carthage. Masses of people, the women are being enslaved, children are being enslaved, men are being massacred. This is the early history of Islam. For goodness sake, wake up, folks. Wake up. Lambert, there is no chance of secularism whittling down Islam, fundamentalist Islam. There's just no way. Because the way it works is this. Number one, you got to understand the Muslim Brotherhood have had a 100-year plan, a 100-year plan to take over the West. We are 50 years into that plan, and they are successful. When you hear the words Islamophobia, Muslim Brotherhood are the ones that have pushed it to the politicians. Many of the politicians are in the pocket of the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar finances them. They have buildings, houses in London. They have lecturers and journalists in the BBC in the pocket of the Muslim Brotherhood. There is no way that these fundamentalists are going to calm down. That's it, bro. At the same time, Muhammad's birth, Christianity covered all of the Roman provinces of Asia, across the Caucasus to the Caspian Sea, Syria, the Holy Land, and all North Africa, across to the Atlantic Ocean. Most of the Christians in the world lived in Asia and Africa. Europe was at the time the backwater of the church. Some of the most famous early church fathers were North African: Clement of Alexandria, Cyprian of Carthage, Tertullian of Carthage, Augustus of Hippo, Origen of Alexandria. Other great church leaders came from the Middle East: John Chrysostom of Constantinople, Polycarp of Smyrna, St. Paul of Tarsus. All these areas were conquered by the sword of Islam. In the first century of Islam, 3,200 churches was destroyed or converted into mosques. I'll read that again. In the first century of Islam, 3,200 churches were destroyed or converted into mosques. And as Gareth has put, the same rubbish the left-wingers and communists and queers for Palestine defend. These left-wingers, communists and pro-queer and all this, all standing with Islam, they don't know what they're doing. This is madness. They say there is a massive apostasy, but it only takes a small percentage of these these Islamic extremists to take control. You don't need all the Muslims, you know. The bloodiest story in history. Beginning in AD 712, the Muslim armies invaded India. Commanded by Muhammad Qasim, the Muslim armies smashed statues, demolished temples, plundered the palaces, slaughtered vast numbers of Indian men, enslaved the women and children. It took the invaders 3 days to slaughter all the inhabitants of the poor city of Debel. At one point, the governor of Iraq, Hijaz, brought an order rebuking the armies of Muhammad Qasim for showing mercy to the infidel. O true believers, when you encounter the unbelievers, strike off their heads, and forth grant pardon to no one of the enemy and spare none of them, or else all will consider you a weak-minded man. The Hijaz demanded that all able-bodied Indian men were to be killed and that all their sons and daughters were to be enslaved or retained as hostages. At the town of Brahmabad, Qasim massacred over 10,000 men. That's the Indian conquest. Ibn Warwick, in The Quest for the Historical Muhammad, describes the later exploits of Muhammad Ghazi in the 11th century as passing through India like a whirlwind, destroying, pillaging, and massacring. Warwick summarizes the effects of 17 invasions of Muhammad. Muhammad utterly ruined the prosperity of the country and performed the wonderful exploits by which the Hindus became like atoms of dust scattered in all directions. Describing Mathuru, the holy city of Krishna, in the middle of the city there was a temple larger and finer than the rest, which can neither be described nor painted. The Sultan was of the opinion that 200 years would have been required to build it. The Sultan gave orders that all the temples should be burnt with fire and leveled to the ground. The ancient cities of Banarsi, Mathuru, Ujjain, Meshwar, Jwalkuti, Dharka were sacked and the population massacred, and not one temple left standing. Will Durant, in his Story of the Civilization, described the Muslim invasion of India as probably the bloodiest story in history. Historians describe medieval India until the Islamic invasion as a most rich and imaginative culture with ornate architecture, spectacular sculptures, and a complex order. The Islamic invasion broke and ruined everything beautiful they came across in Hindustan, displaying, as one Indian commentator put it, the resentment of the less developed warriors who felt intimidated in their encounter a more refined culture. The Sultans built mosques at the sites of torn down Hindu temples, and many Hindus were sold into slavery. At Sumner, 50,000 Hindus were slaughtered on Muhammad's orders. The northwestern region of India is called the Hindu Kush, the slaughter of the Hindu, as a reminder of the vast number of Hindu slaves who died whilst being marched across the Afghan mountains to the Muslim markets in Central Asia. Wow. Wow. That's why I wanted to give you this lecture, folks. Can you see what you're up against in the West, what we're up against in the West? Can you see what we're up against in the West? We'll keep going, folks. The Buddhists were also targeted for destruction. In AD 1193, Muhammad Khidr burnt to the ground their famous library. With the Muslim destruction of the Buddhist stronghold in Bihar, the survivors retreated into Nepal and Tibet. Some escaped to the south of the subcontinent. Some of the last remaining monuments to the Buddhist culture, 4 statues of Buddha, were destroyed by the Taliban in Afghanistan in March 2001. In AD 1351, Firuz Shah commanded all Hindus to be killed and all Hindu temples to be destroyed. On the site of many of the raised temples, he built mosques. On October 24, February 1568, after the Battle of Chittor, the Mongol Emperor Akbah ordered 30,000 captured men. 30,000 captured Hindus to be executed. Akbah is remembered by historians as one of the most tolerant of Muslim rulers of India. In fact, Akbah incorporated numerous Hindu and Zoroastrian festivals and practices and was condemned as an apostate, but yet he had 30,000 Hindus killed. Shah Jahan is remembered as the builder of the Taj Mahal. He was the 5th Mongol emperor and grandson of Akbah. What few Westerners know is that the builder of the Taj Mahal launched 48 military campaigns against non-Muslims in just 30 years. In 628, he killed all his male relatives except one who escaped in Persia. Shah Jahan had 5,000 concubines in his harem, but still indulged in incestuous sex with his daughters Chamani and Jahana. In just one town, Banaras, Jahan destroyed 76 Hindu temples. He also demolished Christian churches at Agar and Lahore. When he captured a place called Hue, a Portuguese enclave near Calcutta, he had 10,000 inhabitants blown up with powder, drowned in water, and burned by fire. Another 4,000 were enslaved and offered Islam or death. Those who refused to convert were killed. So, can you see where we're going with this, folks? It ain't going to go well for the West. Have you woken up yet? Have you woken up yet? As the penny dropped, you've imported millions of these people from the Middle East. And this is what you're going to get. This is what you're going to get. At the moment, they're playing the appeasement game, and the West is also appeasing them. The West dealing with Islamic terrorist organizations, the guy who's the head of Syria. Trump having him over to the White House. This guy coming to UK, he coming to France. You can't appease evil. You can't play with evil. You can't dance with these people. They want to destroy Western civilization. We are in a massive crisis. We are on the verge of a revolution. We are appeasing a group that are a Trojan horse within the West that will destroy Western civilization, and we don't even realize it. I've just given you, we're not even halfway through the history of Islam, and all you're hearing is blood, 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 blood. When will you not wake up? We have politicians that are spineless and weak, and if I would like to say, pure evil. Pure evil. How can you support the guy who's the head of Syria right now, who was known to be an Islamic extremist who's going killing everybody? And then you're supporting him, all for political advantage. Why isn't it we haven't sent troops into Nigeria to defend the Christians? No, because we're placating, the Western politicians are placating these Islamic extremists. They say one thing, these Western politicians say one thing from one side of the mouth, but then they say another thing on another side of the mouth. They condemn Islamic extremists on one side, yet they promote it on the other. We have MPs. We have British MPs that have openly stated that the West needs to be defeated. And by what? By the Ummah. By the new caliphate that will come. This is the situation that we're in. I'm not being an Islamophobe. I'm not being extremist. I'm just telling you hard, brute facts of history. This is why I wanted to do this lecture, because it's important. We continue. Unfinished business. The surge of Trevokif, the sword of the Prophet, observes that the massacres perpetuated by Muslims in India are unparalleled in history, bigger in sheer number than the Holocaust or the massacre of the Armenians by the Turks, more extensive even than the slaughter of the South American native populations by invading Spanish and Portuguese. They are insufficiently known in the outside world. However, Gandhi and Nehru went around encrusting even thicker coats of whitewash so that they could pretend a facade of Hindu-Muslim unity against British colonial rule. After independence, Marxist Indian writers, blinded by the distorting ideology, repeated the big lie about the Muslim record. Militant Islam sees India as unfinished business, and it remains high on the agenda of oil-rich Muslim countries such as Saudi Arabia, which are spending millions every year trying to convert Hindus to Islam. So the massacres in India were bigger than the Holocaust. That's 6 million Jews. And we don't hear anything in history. Do you see how there is a whitewashing of the history of Islam? We don't hear these things in the political discourse. We don't hear the massacres that went on in India. The intellectuals in the West, blinded by their stupidity. Spain under the Moors. On the Western Front, Muslim armies conquered all North Africa, Spain, and even parts of south of France, but at the Battle of Tours AD 732, the Franks, under the leadership of Charles Martel, turned the tide and drove the Muslim armies out of France. The Muslims withdrew behind the Pyrenees mountain range, which separated France from Spain. Spain, under the Muslim Moors, was hardly the jewel of Islamic tolerance that it often purported to be. In AD 920, Caliph Rahman III put the inhabitants of Moors to the sword. In AD 923, he entered Palmroma and destroyed its cathedral. Moorish Spain by R. Fletcher records the destruction of Cordova, Sajov, and Merida, where all adult males were executed and all women and children enslaved. Spain is often used by Muslims as, oh, we were so kind and good to the people in Spain. But here we hear there were massacres going on. In AD 1066, all the Jews of Grenada were slaughtered. In AD 1126, the Christians of Grenada were deported to Morocco. As Fletcher observes, in Moorish Spain, oppression or anarchy with the rule, good order, and civilized behavior, a fondly remembered exception. Much has been made of Muslim apologists of the freedom of religion and toleration for Christians and protected persons. In fact, freedom of religion in Muslim areas only meant the freedom of Christians and Jews to convert to Islam, never the other way around. Christians and Jews were encouraged to convert to Islam, but Muslims were forbidden on pain of death to change their Islamic religion. The Pact of Ummah. The Pact of Ummah guided the Islamic policy towards Christians. Aside from being forced to pay jizya, a crippling poll tax, and haraj, land tax, to the Muslims, the Christians were forbidden to carry weapons, to share their faith with Muslims, or even to display the cross in public. The Pact of Ummah, which all conquered Christians were forced to solemnly declare, we shall not build our cities or in their vicinities any new monasteries, churches, we shall not restore by night or by day any of them that have fallen into ruin, of which are located in the Muslim quarters. We shall keep our gates wide open for the passerby and traveller. We shall provide 3 days' food and lodging to any Muslim who pass our way. We shall not hold public religious ceremonies. We shall not seek to proselytize anyone. We shall not prevent any of our kin from embracing Islam if they so desire. We shall show deference to the Muslim and shall rise from our seats when they wish to sit down. We shall not ride on saddles. We shall not wear swords, or bear weapons of any kind, or ever carry with us. We shall not sell wines. We shall clip the forelocks of our head. We shall not display our crosses or our books anywhere in the Muslims' thoroughfares or in the marketplaces. We shall not raise our voices when reciting the service in our churches, nor when in the presence of Muslims. Neither shall we raise our voices in our funeral processions. We shall not build our houses higher than theirs. And they call Islam of peace. They call Islam that they protected people when they went into these lands. But the Pact of Umar shows you how despicable, fascistic these people were. And you're heading for this in a country near you, folks. The House of War. Before the Crusades began, the prominent Islamic scholar Abu al-Mawadi presented a formal blueprint for Islamic government. It reiterated the division of the world into the House of Islam, where Sharia law is being enforced, and the House of War, which is the rest of the world. According to al-Mawadi, the House of Islam is in permanent state of war with all others. Peace can only come with the completion of global conquest. When the Muslims are a minority community, they need temporarily to adopt a peaceful attitude in order to deceive their neighbors. But in the final objective, where Muslims rule and infidels are forcibly converted or massacred, al-Mahdi made it clear that jihad was an obligation for all Muslims, and Muslims could use tactical ceasefires but could never consider the abandonment of jihad until all unbelievers have been subjugated. You've heard it there, folks. You've heard it there. Under Sharia law, a non-Muslim's testimony is not admissible against a Muslim. Non-Muslims could not be employed in any position of superiority over a Muslim. No non-Muslim should ever hold a position in which he can have power over a Muslim. Islam's turned its boundary with the outside world into a perpetual war zone. Muslim armies crossed Pyrenees, promising to stable their horses in St. Peter's at Rome. However, exactly a century after the Prophet's death, Charles Martel, the Hammer, defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in AD 732. Churches demolished, pilgrims persecuted. In AD 1009, Caliph Hakim of Egypt ordered the destruction of the Holy Sepulchre of all Christian places of worship in Jerusalem. From this point on, the Christians were persecuted even more cruelly than the previous years of Muslim rule. In AD 1065, thousands of Christian pilgrims under the leadership of Bishop Gunther were attacked by Muslims in violation of the early agreements of safe passage. The rise of the Turks made the position of Christian pilgrims even more desperate. The Christian Byzantine Empire had reconquered much of Syria and Palestine, including Antioch in AD 969. However, the Turks invaded much of these lands and conquered Christian Armenia and most of Asia Minor. In AD 1070, they took Jerusalem, and in AD 1071, they defeated the Greek Emperor Diogenes of Manzikert. Antioch fell to the Turks in AD 1084, and by 1092, all the Christian parishes in Asia lay under the control of Muslims. The Byzantines appealed to the West for help to recover their lands from the onslaught of Islam. So the Crusades started with the Muslims, not with the Christians. The Muslims were attacking the pilgrims. The result was on 27th of November, AD 1095, the Pope called upon the Knights of Europe to go forth and rescue the Holy Sepulchre and retake the Holy Land. Thousands of knights pledged themselves to liberate the Holy Land from Islam. It is interesting that many who excuse the atrocities of Islam jihad in terms of the standards of the Middle Ages ably double standard by condemning the Christian Crusades, which were, after all, only a reaction to centuries of Islamic jihad. Many Christians condemn the Crusades as completely against the spirit of Christ. Certainly the sword crusade does not appear in the Bible, and there is no teaching of Christ or the apostles commanding the Crusades. However, very few people have any understanding of what was actually involved in the Crusades. The facts are that May AD 1097, the armies of the First Crusade were assembled. The 1st of July 1097, the Crusades defeated the Turks at the Battle of Dorylaeum. Constantly harassing by relentless enemies, suffering from the stifling heat under the weight of their armor, the Crusaders advanced through Asia Minor. On the 20th of October 1097, they laid siege to the fortified city of Antioch. On the 3rd of June 1098, the Crusaders stormed Antioch and captured it. By then, plague, famine, and wounds had decimated their ranks. A recuperation and resupply was necessary. To Jerusalem. By April AD 1099, the Crusader army was on the march again to Jerusalem. They marched through scorched earth, and all the trees, even fruit trees, had been chopped down, wells poisoned to deny the Crusaders shade, food, or water. The Crusaders also started to meet Christians and Jews who had been evicted from Jerusalem by the Muslim occupiers. These destitute refugees had lost everything and were now struggling to find water, shelter, and food in a devastated area. When the Crusaders reached the walls of Jerusalem, they offered the occupiers terms of surrender. When the Muslim garrison responded with blasphemous comments and actions, including urinating on icons and crucifixions of Christ, the Crusaders rose in indignation and fought for the honor of their King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Crusaders take Jerusalem. On the 15th of July AD 1099, during the eclipse of the sun, the Crusaders stormed the gates of Jerusalem and overwhelmed the vigorous Muslim defences. The Crusaders gave no quarter and slew the entire garrison, cleansing Jerusalem by the blood of these Saracens who had desecrated the holy places. In AD 1112, with the aid of the Norwegians and the support of the Janissary, the Pisan, and the Venetian fleets, the Crusaders began the conquest of the ports of Syria. With the fall of Tyre in AD 1124, this was completed. By the beginning of the 12th century, the Crusaders controlled an unbroken but thin belt of territory consisting of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Countship of Tripoli, and the Principality of Antioch, and the Countship of Edessa. The focus of the Crusaders was on the holy places and the ports, so they did not attempt to develop a strategic depth or create any viable economic or demographic base for the new Christian states. The Crusaders' territory was long, thin, and vulnerable to attack. To defend these outposts, the Crusaders created new religious orders of knights to provide hospitality for pilgrims and to defend the holy places from the Muslims. Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. In AD 1144, the Muslims counter-attacked and conquered the Principality of Edessa. Damascus fell in 1154. Then in AD 1169, Kurdish prince Saladin succeeded his uncle as the Grand Vizier of Egypt. In AD 1171, he helped overthrow the Shiite Fatimid dynasty. Soon Saladin's armies were threatening the Kingdom of Jerusalem from all sides. The 4th of July, AD 1187, Saladin's army defeated the Christians on the shores of Lake Tiberias. He entered Jerusalem on the 17th of September. The Christians still held the ports of Tyre, Antioch, and Tripoli. When the people in Europe heard of the fall of Jerusalem, there was outrage. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, King Philip of France, and Richard the Lionheart, King of England, were the leaders of this Third Crusade. Acre surrendered to Richard on 3rd of July, AD 1191, and numerous battles pitted Richard against Saladin. Saladin respected his foes as brave warriors, and treaty was secured, guaranteed safe access for Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the holy places. After the death of Saladin, Jerusalem was again conquered by the Crusaders in AD 1229. But in 1244, the city fell again to the Muslims. Al-Malik al-Zahir destroyed the church of the Nativity in Nazareth and captured Caesarea. Caesarea capitulated under the condition that its 2,000 knights would be spared. However, once the Muslims gained access to the city, they murdered them all. When Antioch finally fell to the Muslims, 6,000 Christians were executed and 100,000 were sold into slavery. By the end of the 13th century, the last Crusader remnants in Palestine and Syria were wiped out. That may have been the end of the Crusades, but it was by no means the end of jihad. The first Caliph had ruled from Mecca. The Umayyad dynasty ruled from Damascus for 90 years. In AD 749, all the members of the Umayyad family were murdered except Abdul-Rahman, who fled to Spain and found the independent Umayyad Caliphate there. By AD 711, Islam had spread all over Africa and Spain, and by AD 718, it was beginning to overrun southern France. Muslim historians note that at this time, a general spiritual moral decline began to set in. The Abbasid dynasty ruled the Muslim world from 750 to 1258. Baghdad became the new capital of Islam. Initially a small village, Baghdad was built by a slave labor into a great city with palaces, mosques, and impressive government buildings. This empire was totally destroyed by Genghis Khan in the 13th century. The Ottoman Empire was founded by Umayyad Osman I in AD 1301. After the massacre of the last Caliph and all his relatives, Turks from near Caspian Sea began to build a new Islamic empire on the ruins of the declining Byzantine Empire. Eventually, these Ottoman caliphs were ruling the whole of North Africa, near East India, and the Balkans of southern Eastern Europe. Muslim scholars note that the Abbasid dynasty drowned in decadence and luxury and had become deficient in energy and reluctant the Turks captured the great Byzantine capital of Constantinople on the 29th of May, AD 1453. The sparse and woefully outnumbered garrison of Constantinople put up a brave but futile defense and were overwhelmed by the waves of Turkish invaders. The pillaging and looting went on for days. Tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered in the streets. Turkish soldiers fought over boys and young women. The blood ran in rivers down the steep streets in the heights of the Petra towards the Golden Horn. The imperial palace was looted and its treasures carried off. Priceless libraries and icons were burnt, including the Hod Ikra, the holiest icon in all of Byzantium, which was of Mary, believed to have been painted by St. Luke himself. So we'll do another part of this. I've got to get tea. It's ready downstairs. So God bless you all. I hope this has been an interest to you. We'll do a second part later tonight maybe before or after Speaker's Corner. Speaker's Corner review. Okay, so Gareth, Lambert, and Teddy, and Nine, and Delmy, and everybody else who's come. God bless you all. There'll be another part of this lecture, part 2, later today sometime. So I've got to go, and I'll be back soon. God bless you all.